Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new edition of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jarrod Prugar, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Kevin Quigley. Kevin, we're getting down and dirty in the trenches for this podcast as we preview offensive and defensive line. We're just putting it all together. These are two groups that are very, very deep, in my opinion. Defensive line we'll talk about in the second segment, but the offensive line has really come together under Phil Trautwein. The offensive line previously hadn't been as strong of a unit as one might expect at Penn State, but dating back all the way to Bill O'Brien, that wasn't a position of strength. But slowly but surely, over the course of James Franklin's tenure, things have gotten drastically better. And up front, Phil Trautwein has done an absolutely phenomenal job of not only recruitment, but also development. And it's showing, by keeping guys like Drew Aller upright and springing guys like Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton for long runs.
Yeah, and if you look back to the sanction era, because you mentioned Bill O'Brien, offensive line and defensive line, the trenches were really what got hurt the most, right? Quarterback recruiting didn't really dip. I mean, Christian Hackenberg stays committed. Adam Brenneman still comes to Penn State. The offensive weapons were still there. Defense was pretty still strong and solid, but the offensive line really suffered. And if you look back to 4th and 5 against Ohio State at midfield, the questionable decision to run, but the offensive line gets blown up. And was that necessarily a terrible call? Yeah, it kind of was, like, especially looking back on hindsight's 2020. But the offensive line got beat so badly on that play that it never even had a chance to come to fruition or amount to anything, especially even a first down. So, and you mentioned just how deep it is. I got a friend who's an NFL scout, and he mentioned that of all of Penn State's position groups, the offensive line is the most complete from top to bottom of any of the position groups on their roster. So if you have NFL scouts saying that from just a talent evaluation, and really what, 2, maybe 3 are going to be draft eligible this year, Vega, Nick Dawkins, and Drew Shelton are going to be your draft eligibles. Maybe Nolan Rucci as well. So you got 3 or 4 guys who are potentially going to be draft eligible. So they are drawing NFL eyes, and if you've got NFL eyes evaluating them that highly, good things can be expected from this group.
Absolutely. You mentioned Nolan Rucci. Nolan Rucci came on the scene late in the season and had an absolutely phenomenal year to finish. Vic Ione has done a great job up front. Nick Dawkins has been a great anchor at center. He's got a lot of leadership capabilities and qualities, and has also done a great job of just being a quality center. It's good when you don't have to say the center's name because that means he's doing his job. They've done a great job up front, and it's just one of those things that's a testament to Phil Trautwein and the job that he's been able to do because, it's not easy, in the trenches. But, this is a guy that has played it as a high level, coached it at a high level, and it's starting to really, really, come to kind of some really good quality. And I think that's the biggest thing that Penn State has needed up front. I mean, you've got Alex Birchmeier, who's probably going to have a big year. You've got Drew Shelton, who is expected to have a big year. Anthony Donko is, I think you're going to have a decent year. And not everybody is going to start, right? You're going to have some really good opportunities. Javen Williams, I think, is a guy to watch out for. And when you have that type of depth, and the old adage is it's not about your 1s and 2s, but your 3s and 4s. Well, you can go 2 or 3 deep up front and not lose anything. That is absolutely huge. And that's, I think, one of the biggest strengths up front. And that's really why this offense is going to go the way that it's going to go. I mean, Cooper Cousins is a guy that's going to have a big year, I think. He's only a true sophomore. He was a monster last year at times. So, I mean, getting guys like that and getting them into the fold and developing them, that's a big thing for Trautwein and Franklin and Andy Kotelnicki as he goes into year 2 of this offense and it has that more of that improved comfort level.
Yeah, and you lose JB Nelson, you lose Sal Wormley, 2 guys that were at Penn State for a while and started multiple seasons, but Nick Dawkins is going into his second year as a full-time starter. Only allowed 2 sacks last year as a center in his first year. as a center, you're calling out defenses, you're trying to recognize coverages, you're trying to be that second set of eyes for a quarterback. And in your first Big Ten season, you go all the way to this national semifinal game, only give up 2 sacks, playing against some high-level defenses. It was an impressive season for him. And then, have the rest of the guys started really full seasons? No, but Vega Ione, he's played a lot, really athletic, had the pulling guard situations, the 6 offensive line pulling tight end plays from a couple of years ago. So, he can move. And if you have a guy that's the coaching staff is comfortable putting in there as a 6 offensive line, just in there for kick out blocks and to be athletic, it just shows you like just the capability that he could be in the Penn, and then what an asset he could be in the Penn State run game. Cooper Cousins only played in 4 games last year, but he started for those 4 games. And 2 of those games were the Penn State's most productive offensive games of the season last year. So he's shown some flashes, and he kind of just he's stuck behind Sal Wormley. So, he wasn't going to replace him, but the fact that he got those 4 games in and was able to be as productive as he was, and I think he was offensive player of the week one of those weeks, certainly got a lot of recognition from the coaching staff. And then, the interesting part at right tackle is going to be, does Rucci or Donko get the starting job? But Donko started the season, Rucci finished it, but Phil even said it himself. Joe Smeltzer, also from NSN, was interviewing Phil Trotwine a couple weeks ago, and at the start of camp, Phil was comfortable saying 8 to 9 guys are going to be. He's comfortable with 8 or 9 guys playing in Big Ten games this season. His goal is to have 10 by the end of training camp. Obviously, a good goal. You want to be too deep across the board, but we haven't even mentioned Alex Birchmeyer or Javen Williams. You mentioned Javen Williams, but those guys, same class as Cooper Cousins, but those guys were both 5-star recruits, top 5, top 6 of their position group in their recruiting class, and they haven't even broken into the lineup yet. So you love that the starting 5 looks as good as it is, but because it's offensive line, those guys are in the trenches. There's a lot of people falling at their knees, at their ankles, bending backwards, and all sorts of nasty things going on in the trenches, dirty defensive ends, and punches and grabbing and all the sorts of things that can happen to an offensive lineman. If you're going into a season and you're 10 deep across your offensive line, like, you're in a really good position. And we've spent the last 3 weeks talking about quarterbacks, running backs, pass catchers. None of those guys matter if the offensive line isn't able to hold up their end of the bargain. And if you look at the Cowboys a couple of years ago in the NFL, they dominated because they had the best offensive line in the NFL. If you do not have a good offensive line, look at the Tennessee Titans, Jacksonville Jaguars, any place where a rookie quarterback goes whose team was dog crap and went 2-15 last year. Those teams are not successful because their offensive line can't do anything. If your offensive line is successful, can move people off the ball, can give your quarterback time, can give your running back running lanes, all of those things that take time for the offense to develop and be able to be run as the coaches envision it, you already have the upper hand. So I'm really excited about this group. It's not a sexy position to talk about. It's something I really don't have a clue about. Like, I don't know what it takes to be a good offensive lineman. I'm 6 foot, 215 pounds, a little overweight, but never once have been of the body type to be in the offensive line position. So I can watch it. I can look at, are those guys getting beat off the ball? And like, can't really say any of these guys are giving me the heebie-jeebies.
No, I mean, it speaks to, again, we're talking about quality depth. Anytime you can go 1-2 deep at every spot, it's good. And, it's important that when you put a sub in that you don't notice them, right? Every time that you notice one, it usually isn't a bad thing because it's usually somebody either gets tackled for a loss or it's a sack. But again, this just speaks volumes to what Franklin's been able to do on the recruiting side of it. The development side of it, I think, is huge too with what Troutwine has done and what he has sent to the league. But again, this is a good, experienced line that has played a lot of football. It's going to be able to keep Drew Aller upright. It's going to allow Nick Slingleton and Katron Allen to spring some big runs. And it's going to help hopefully open up the passing game too. And I think that's, just as important because they need to get the passing game going to get the offense into control. But good teams Good teams are okay up front. Great teams are good up front. And when you're good up front, it just everything feeds off of that. And that's where Penn State is. And I think that's absolutely what they need to do and what they've needed up front for years and years. Now we get to see it. This is the most hyped I think this offense has been in a while. But more importantly, this is probably the deepest this offense has been. And that's not just at, offensive line, but that's also at running back and, in tight end as well. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this offense and this offensive line develop over the course of the year. We saw how Rucci came on strong late, played some really good football for the Nittany Lions later in the season last year. Can they continue that? And can they continue that from the start of the season? That's what we're going to find out.
Yeah, and I like to look back at also Joe's interview. Is Phil Trotwine even let off with it? Like, he's been there 6 years. He's got a kid going into middle school. He's got a kid in elementary school, and he doesn't want to leave. Position coach stability is not something that Penn State has had of late. There's been a lot of moving parts, and recruiting has kind of shown that, because your position coaches need to be your best recruiters, because that's who you're spending majority of time with. Like, the head coach can only do so much. The head coach cannot go out and recruit all 22 positions on the field. It's just not physically possible. So you need recruiting staff and you need position coaches to really develop those relationships. And I think that Phil is a prime example of, he's been there 6 years. He said it's his best offensive line that he's coached, maybe less. I think he said the 2022, 2023 season. I think they put 3 guys in the NFL after that season. But this is a line that, again, could put 3 or 4 guys in the NFL as well. So Phil Trotwine is probably one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, and he's an asset to Penn State at this point in time. And with his messaging of he's not going to leave for another college job, I think he left the door open for a potential NFL job opening. I think that you would make that job. I don't think he has aspirations to be an offensive coordinator or anything like that. Maybe he wants to get to the NFL and be an offensive line coach there, but for now he's not stuck in college. He wants to be in college. He wants to be at Penn State. And if you've got a position coach that passionate to stay and that comfortable to stay where he's at, like, what an asset to the program.
Right. I mean, and it's crazy kind of going back. I saw this the other day. There's only one coach on the staff from when Penn State last beat Ohio State. Can you name him?
It's James Franklin.
One assistant coach.
Poindexter?
Terry Smith. That's it. I mean, Jaywan Sider had been there forever, but he's no longer with the program. He's at Notre Dame. Deion Barnes, I think, is going to be there for a while. Dan Connor, I think, is going to be there for a while. Poindexter is probably a guy that I could see leaving, but I don't know if that's going to be something that's neither here nor there. But defensively, you've got 3 other Penn State guys and Terry Smith, and we'll talk about the defense here coming up. But offensively, you've got Stan Drayton, who's brand new. You've got Ty Howell, who's tight end coach. He's not going anywhere. Marcus Higgins, I think, needs to have his group needs to have a really good year. I don't think it's his fault by any means, the lack of success recently, considering most of those guys that he has recruited haven't been on the field. But yeah, it's very unique to see a guy like Trotwine and seeing guys like him and Terry Smith, and they just don't want to go anywhere bigger, higher, whatever, to have more responsibility and get away from what they do best. So I think there's value in that, but it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But having that consistency in that offensive line room is huge for them, and that's really resulted in a lot of their success.
Yeah, certainly. And I think this team will go as far as their offensive line takes them, because it's just going to open up everything else that Kotelnicki wants. Kotelnicki's got so many tricks up his sleeve. Some of them probably take a little bit longer to develop, especially if wide receivers need to get open. If they perform well, I think this team can perform really, really well.
We're going to talk more about the defense when we come back from this break on the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, let's talk about the defensive line, both defensive tackle and defensive end. This is a position group that lost Abdul Carter last year. He's with the Giants now. But this is a group that, again, I think is deep. They're young, they're raw, they're inexperienced. But I do think that they have some serious talent, and I do think that they have some serious depth at both defensive end and defensive tackle. And I think that's going to be huge, setting up for what Jim Knowles wants to do with this defense.
Yeah, I think the only bummer of this season is that Max Granville's likely done for the year, out for longer term. That happened over the summer, I do believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And he's probably that next guy that you're looking to be, the next Abdul Carter. But that there's still denied it something in that room. 5-star guy, had flashes last year, kind of got hampered a little bit by a groin injury through the middle of the season. And anything soft tissue, muscular, trying to rehab that in a football season and being ready to go and trying to play in the biggest games, like, it's just not going to happen. So guy with all the talent in the world, maybe not as athletic as Abdul or Micah, but, perfectly capable. And he's a big guy. So, yeah, I think that's where I look, is probably the biggest bum of this is Max Granville, but a bright side is definitely going to be Deny with, all the talent news, and with the string of defensive ends that they've had from Chop to Micah, or Micah to Chop to now Abdul, or to Abdul, and now it's Deny's turn to be that star guy.
Right, and I think that's the thing. Deny Dennis Sutton, I think, is going to be a monster up front. He's one of the McDonough guys from Maryland. I think there's value in that, and Zariah Fisher, I think, is a guy that we haven't really talked about because he was hurt last year, and I think that is, he appeared in 13 games in 2023, made 17 tackles, 3.5 sacks. But the biggest thing is he's going to come back healthy. That's huge. Guy that James Franklin has pointed out specifically is Chaz Coleman. Chaz Coleman's a true freshman, just came onto campus. I think he's going to be a guy that's you're going to want to keep an eye out on. Obviously, the injury to Granville sucks, but they have some options there. Chaz Coleman's a dude that's 6'4", just started playing with his hand in the ground as a defensive end last year. Only did that 1 year in high school, and he's been an absolute monster. He's 6'4", 240. He's got quickness. He was a quarterback at one point in his career. And I think another guy that you need to watch out for is Jalen Harvey. When you're able to kind of rattle off 2-3 deep, I think that's going to be good for them moving forward. But it's also important to note, the way that Jim Knowles deploys their defense. Some of these times, these guys are going to be stand-up ends. Some of the times they're going to be down in the dirt. But some of the time, there's only going to go with 3 down linemen up front. It's going to be very interesting to see how Jim Knowles kind of deploys his ends in his defense.
Yeah, you and I talked about, just to go back to Chaz, you and I have talked about if you get your name mentioned in a post-practice interview or any sort of James Franklin media availability, that means things. If you're a true freshman that's never even seen the field in an official regular season game, that means even more things. I think Jim Knowles refers to him as the Chazmanian Devil, which, if you're getting a nickname before your first game from Jim Knowles, also a great sign. And he was kind of a late bloomer. I looked back at his, recruiting and offer profile. Got some like Youngstown State, some smaller schools in like early 2024. Penn State was September 2024, and he's class of 2025 guy. So waiting until the fall of 2024 to get a 2025 offer from a big D1 school is something. Ohio State offered late, and he went on an official visit there, but it ended up recruiting or committing to Penn State and signing. Obviously, he's on the team, but those guys are the ones that really have the potential. It's the late bloomers that you look for, because, you and I were both in high school. I don't know about you. I was like 5'5" my freshman year. Like, I had no sorts of athleticism. I didn't hit my growth spurt until the end of sophomore year. And, maybe Chaz was that kind of guy, but not everybody in high school grows at the same time. And like, I've got a friend whose son is like 6'3" in his freshman season, is playing football. Like, he's won the genetic lottery. He's a guy who has the body to play high school football all the way. But Chaz, he was playing quarterback, he was playing tight end, he's playing basketball. Like, defensive end, maybe his body just wasn't ready for it. Now it finally is ready for it. They've found that he can use his athleticism there. They found that he's got a natural talent for it. I'm going to switch to DN, get some D1 offers out of it, and boom. So, not a highly ranked recruit. He was the 10th ranked player in Ohio, but to get those offers that late, it sounds like he was just a very fast riser through his senior season. And if you can rise that fast to 10th best player in Ohio, with only one season at your position, it says something for what you have done. And then you start getting mentioned by coaching staff before you've ever played it down. That means a lot of things. So, if you look for that second, third defensive end guy, yeah, he's a true freshman, but he's got the size, he's got the body. He's probably put on, all those guys are putting on 15, 20 pounds of muscle by the time they get to campus, or from the time they get to campus to week one. So kind of look for that. And then I'm really excited for the inside. Not Zariah Fisher, Zane Durant. That guy's got oak logs for thighs and just so quick. He's only like 6 foot, I think, a little bit shorter on the spectrum for the D tackle position, but lightning quick off the ball, athletic, can easily blow up guards and centers. Beast last year, and I'm excited for him to see how he continues to grow. And then Nittany White comes in from Texas A&M, came in as a defensive end, and they've already moved him to defensive tackle. So, he's probably transformed his body a little bit. But if you were playing defensive end in the SEC, granted it was at Texas A&M, you have a lot of athleticism. So how does the transition to defensive tackle work? We'll see, but it's got to be a guy with a lot of athleticism. If he can adjust to being, near the center and the guard versus over the tackle or outside the tackle, that's somebody who can play a good hybrid role in a Jim Knowles defense, where if they need to go to 3 down linemen, do some complex coverage, drop in some D tackles into coverage, which I do believe Ohio State was known to do last year. He's a guy that has the athleticism to potentially pick up a tight end or potentially pick up a running back. And then that's just an extra weapon. That's an extra layer of disguise that the defense can put out there. So I'm really excited about a defensive end to defensive tackle position change.
Yeah, and that speaks volumes to the depth they think they have at defensive end. Nittany White was good enough to play defensive end, obviously in the SEC. But when you have guys like Chaz Coleman's got a great frame. He's still growing. He's only 18, 19 years old. So there's that as well. But at D tackle, you got Zane Durant. You've got Alonzo Ford Jr., who's going to be a good player.
Richmond guy, Alonzo Ford Jr. Went to
Variety. Yeah, there you go. Old Dominion, played for Ricky Ronnie. A guy that I want to look out for is Owen Waffle as well, Michigan transfer. So they have some good options. Obviously, we got to see how it goes. But for them to have the confidence in the belief in Nittany White to move inside, put his hand in the ground, and get after it up the middle, that's huge for him. He's 6'5", 275. I would imagine he's probably put on some good weight too since those measurements were taken. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that develops. But they've got some serious options up front on the defensive side of the football, and that's going to make the back end better. When you run that 3-3-5 or however Jim Knowles wants to deploy those guys, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how those guys get after the quarterback, how aggressive they are, and how much that helps out the backside of the defense.
Yeah, and I think the defensive line only has to be as productive as it was, or very close to its production last year, right? It wasn't particularly dominant. It had a couple of flashes where, Abdul makes a splash play, and I think tonight DDS is capable of that. But it wasn't the star of the show. I think they have enough athletes, they have enough stars behind that. If that group is even just, facilitable, I think it'll be well more than facilitable, but, they don't have to have a high bar. Like they just got to be good against the run and, get enough pressure on the quarterback to maybe rush some throws. And I think, maybe make a game-changing play or two, but I think this team is fully capable. I would say this is probably Penn State's weakest position group especially in terms of experience, because, you're only returning 2 starters. So, 50% of them are going to be, first-time starters who are in a big-time role. So a lot of inexperience, versus compared to the offensive line, who has a considerably amount more experience. So, there's a lot of room for growth, and I think the schedule sets up for growth opportunities, especially early in the season. And, I'm excited to watch them grow. I think it's an intriguing position group with a couple question marks, but, like you mentioned, with some of the position changes that they made with Nittany moving from outside to inside, I think the coaching staff is expecting a good bit from this group.
Yeah, as they should. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out on the field. But we're going to talk a little bit more about everything else Penn State football when we come back to the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast, Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jarrod. He's Kevin. Kevin, let's talk stadium. The stadium is being renovated. The west side of the stadium was demolished, or the press box was demolished, and now they have some serious options. They've got some temporary bleachers, and they've got some space pods for the press box. And what that means is, or what that means for the press box is, it's going to be radio and some TV personnel and some cameras, and that's really about it. Where it's at, it's going to be lower than the original press box, which is both good and bad, I think, for sight lines and stuff like that. And then on top of that are some temporary bleachers, which look kind of different, and it's a different aesthetic. But these are being made by the company that handles the temporary bleachers for most PGA Tour events, especially the ones at TPC or the stadium course. Maybe you can help me out with the name of the course. I forget.
TPC's Sawgrass.
Yes, that's it. I knew it was an S, but I knew I was going to screw it up. So that's going to be interesting to see how they are. Pat Kraft has mentioned that they are safe. The offensive lineman did a video on them to make sure that they are safe. Now, that stadium is going to be shaking. That stadium is going to be crazy. I don't know how safe they will be, but I would imagine if they're safe enough, for these opportunities, I think they're going to be just fine. Penn State's going to cross their T's, dot their I's, and make sure that they don't have a serious lawsuit on their hands, because now they got to pay their football players, the money that they're deserved.
Yeah, and official capacity 106,304. Last year's official capacity was 106,572. So only about 270 seats lost there. I think the temporary bleachers look perfectly adequate. I wouldn't say they fit. It certainly looks different than the old press box and the Connex box that it was. Last season they're averaging 108,000 people a game. Might they come in a hair under it? Yeah, but with this capacity, it's still the second largest stadium in the Western Hemisphere, behind the Big House. So, not a real big reduction in crowd capacity. Going to be certainly a different thing to look at aesthetically. I think it's perfectly adequate for a stadium that's under a $750 million renovation. Don't need to invest all your money in temporary bleachers if you're investing that much money in the final version. So, it's going to be different. I think the end result is far going to outweigh any sort of temporary growing pains that they have while they're doing the renovation. And, I'm just excited. I don't care what the stadium looks like, because I think the product on the field is going to look way better than what we've seen in years past. And honestly, there's a lot more expectations.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing. The press box is near and dear to my heart, obviously, having spent will be my 10th year on the beat. The press box has now been moved to the suite side of the stadium, so the east side, which is closer to the cars, or at least where my parking spot originally was. And now I think there's value in all of that. And it's going to be on the if you're facing the suites, it's the far left side. So it'll probably be about the 10, 15-yard line. Looking down, it'll give you a different angle as well to see the student section and see the team come out, which will be pretty cool. But it's a growing year at Beaver Stadium, West Shore Field at Beaver Stadium. They put out those graphics out in the front of the student section, and they look like they were made with a label maker. Obviously, they're very temporary. My theory, my thinking is simple. Just go with the original. Just go with the best looking part of it. Don't piecemeal it together. Just take the time, wait, do it right. Rather than adjusting the way that they did. But again, it's a good opportunity for Penn State to show that growth. They are on schedule, on time, and within the budget, according to Pat Kraft, who met with the media before Penn State practice today, or I should say Tuesday. So that is obviously very good. These are all well needed changes at Beaver Stadium. You can't replicate what Beaver Stadium is like had you built a new stadium. It's just that simple. Renovation was the way to go, and now we get to see the fruits of their labor and all the money, that was donated to fund the project.
Yeah, and this is only for 2 years, right? And the end product in the third season will be well worth it. And yeah, I'm just going to stick with what I said earlier. It's the product on the field matters way more than the accommodations of the stadium around it as the stadium's getting some construction done. So, yeah.
Kevin, any parting shots before we go and we get prepared to start our game week level podcast?
Yeah, game week going to record Sunday for hopefully a Monday release, I do believe is our schedule there. Parting shot, Auburn. What are we doing?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is my favorite thing in the world.
I got to pull it up just because I wasn't fully ready for this, but Auburn has 2 official national championships, and they are now claiming an additional 4. So they have,
but yet they won't post the final
1957 and
score for
2010,
Penn State's game with them. Penn State's last game against Auburn, they still haven't posted the final score. Yeah,
it never happened.
Figment of our imagination at Jordan-Hare Stadium.
So, 1957, 2010 are official national titles. They've claimed 1913, 83, and 93, but they are going to add 1910, 1914, 1958, and 2004. This is even worse than UCF claiming national championships. UCF at least did it like right after the season, not 21 years after. Did UCF have a claim to be national championship that year? Absolutely not. I think, when they went to the Peach Bowl and who did they play? Did they play Auburn in that Peach Bowl?
In the Peach Bowl?
When UCF claimed their national champion, was that Auburn?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure. But either way.
I'm going to look it up real quick. But, they at least they could at least say, it was Auburn, ironically. Auburn was very disinterested in that game. Mackenzie Milton was the quarterback for UCF. Got that real quick.
Yes, legendary.
Yes. So UCF at least can say that they didn't have a chance to play for it. They can claim whenever they want. They got snubbed. They think that they got snubbed from playing in the conference in the national title game. However, Auburn, just because you were first in some random poll that was not the AP poll, which was the recognized national champion until we went to the national title game in the BCS format and wherever we stand now with 87 teams eventually going to be in the playoff. It's just it's such a weird look from a program that's seemingly faltering and just living in turmoil and ambiguity at this point in time. It's a Bush League move.
It is very bizarre.
Claiming national titles. Come on.
If that's the case, Penn State needs to take one in 1994 for sure, and then probably another couple as well. But I think it's great. We're just going to claim what isn't ours and wasn't earned properly. And obviously things were a lot different back then. Don't get me wrong. But again, what are we doing? Obviously, honoring Cam Newton makes sense for them. He was a star player, won the Heisman, had an incredible 2010 season, if I'm not mistaken. But, man, what are we doing here, Auburn? Post the final score graphic one time. We're going to claim national championships, but we still don't know whether we won or lost against Penn State.
You had such a good PR week with the Cam Newton jersey retirement. Sure, was he polarizing, but Marty Smith was on Pat McAfee today talking about, just how good of a person
Cam Newton was, in his professional life, just a professional on and off the field, doing good in the community, all this other stuff. Sure, he had some issues at Florida. He gets to Auburn, does what he does there, wins the national title. 15 years later, they retire his jersey. Like, this is a big PR win. Like, we can get fan base motivated. You can get booster dollars in on this. And then we go start claiming national titles. And that's like, what are we doing?
College football. That's why we love it, Kevin. For Kevin Quigley, this has been Jarrod Prugar on the Lasching Out Podcast and the Sports Now Network. We'll catch you again next week as we begin our game prep for Nevada and the regular season for Penn State. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network.